بدأت الحكاية منذ مئات السنين بين القبائل العربية في صحراء الجزيرة القاحلة، عندما تولد عشق بين الجواد والفارس. ورغم كل الظروف القاسية استمرت شعلة التلاحم بينهم حتى يومنا هذا. وقد حظيت الخيل العربية على مر السنين برعاية إلهية سخر فيها العديد من عشاق الخيل الذين حافظوا على هذا الإرث العتيق جيلا بعد جيل من المشرق إلى المغرب.
One thing leads into another, and then you get off over here.
How old was Ibn Halima then you bought, which was what, a yearling?
He was a yearling.
Yes.
Yeah, we bought the 3 yearlings, and Ibn Halima was, let's see, he was, I think all 3 were born in September. And we were there, I think it was the end of August, 1st of September, right about 1 year. Yeah. He was, of course, these were all 3 Nazir children. And as we went around the farm, of course, we could pick out the Nazirs. They were just so
different.
So different. I mean, they all had a certain quality, a certain look, as opposed to, of course, Sid Abu Huma was there at that time. Yeah. And he had some very nice progeny. But they were different. They didn't have that certain, whatever it was that Nazir put on his progeny, you could pick them out.
And then Murafiq at that time was how old? Also as?
Murafiq was one of the other stallions they brought out at that time. He was, I think, he'd just come back from the racetrack. And they couldn't hold, they sent him off to race. I mean, nobody could hold him. So they finally sent him back to a standard stud. I mean, when we first saw him, I remember Dr. Marsafi said, "I think this is the head you're looking for." And he stuck his head out of the stall, and I mean, it looked like somebody taken a baseball bat and smashed his head in. And it was the most unusual head because it had the break, the dish was above the eyes.
Yes.
It was almost like a concavity above the eyes, not below where most horses have a dish.
Much higher.
And definitely had the Nazir look, but I remember he had, a much more powerful laid-back shoulder. And he had a good length of neck. He was a very elegant horse.
So he was older. He was like 4, 5?
I think he was 4. He was born in 56. I think he was 4.
Yes.
But remarkable horse. I mean, just took your breath away.
But what year did he come to America later on?
Well, Marshall wanted, when Doug Marshall came to Egypt, he wanted to buy him, but they wouldn't sell him.
That was much later,
So
right?
I think he brought him in 65 or 66.
Yeah, so that was 6, 7 years
They finally
later.
agreed to sell him.
Yes.
In the meantime, to digress a little bit here, Doug flew up to see our 3 yearlings when we had imported them.
Yes.
And that's when he decided. As a matter of fact, he tried to buy them. We said we wouldn't sell them. So that's when he decided to go to Egypt. And at that time, they wouldn't sell Murafiq.
But when you bought the horses, you sent them to the States. You were still not residing fully in the States, full time.
No, Don's father looked after them for a while.
Yes.
And then eventually everybody wanted to breed Ibn Halima, and we needed to get a manager because I was gone part of the time. And then I started coming home every spring. So we stayed overseas until 1973, I think Don came home. But we always had a manager after that to run the farm and to help me with
the horses.
With the horses.
And then you moved to Arkansas.
Well, then we moved to Lufkin, Texas, and then we moved to Arkansas.
After
and
that.
then we bought a farm in Kentucky, and we used to take some of the horses there during the horse shows in Kentucky, but we sold it. So the main one was Arkansas.
Yeah. I'll ask you some, if I may, some more questions about other horses that you saw. The foundation stock. Mm-hmm. If you recall, Sameh also.
Who?
Sameh.
Sameh?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. He was one of the Inchos horses, as was Antar. And Sameh was, I remember the first time I saw him, he was over at the other farm, right near the EAO, or the El Zara, he and El Saria. He was a very well-conformed horse, a substantial body, a little bit heavy, a little bit heavy in the neck, but a well-shaped neck, a pleasing head, but not an extreme head. And he had very fine bones. He was a very fine-boned horse and moved really well. Good top line. Just, I would say, just a well-balanced individual. Nice expression, not a big eye, relatively short head. Not, I'd say medium-length head. It's funny because a lot of the Americans liked that horse very, very much when they would come to visit. And he was a good stallion, a good sire of mares, really good sire of mares. And his primary contribution, I think, to the Egyptian breeding, probably more so than any other stallion, was he put really good bodies on. Many of the old Inchos and RAS horses had rather peaky croups and kind of a little bit raftery, short croups, little peak. He ironed those croups out. I mean, you can look at all the Sameh daughters, and that was one trait of any mare that he fixed consistently. As well, he was also good moving.
Yes.
He also produced color, sired color.
Yes.
And
good eye?
I would say some yes, some average.
Yes.
Some had very good eyes, better than he did probably. But I think it depended on the mares he was bred to. Good movement.
Sameh.
Yeah, good movement, and his progeny moved well.
And it's a type of blood which continues on. Some of the stallions, they produce something, but it disappears.
Yeah.
Some seems to keep it.
He really fixed the bodies.
And
they
but he keeps
fixing.
it.
They needed fixing.
Yes.
They needed fixing.
And you can see it on and on and on.
I don't think, I'm trying to remember if von Zantner used him or if they started using him because he was one of the horses that was kept. It was reserved from the Inchos herd. Anyway, you could definitely see. I don't remember seeing any Sameh daughters when we were there the first time. So I'm not sure he was used right away or he was being used then. But a very interesting horse. I think a very valuable horse, all things considered, in the early stages of the, I would say the late 50s, early 60s.
Aladdin. How old was he when you saw him? Also older?
Well, he was also a Nazir's son.
Yes.
And liver chestnut, I remember, beautiful chestnut. Very tall, a bit narrow.
Tall, you mean?
Tall in height, long legs.
Ah.
I mean, basically.
Yes.
Very elegant horse. A lot of people really liked him. He had a very nice neck, a very pretty head, not a large eye, but a very well-shaped and nice ears. He was not a very wide horse. He was a little bit narrow and tended, I think, a little bit to a little bit in at the elbows. And kind of a little odd movement behind. But he was a very well balanced horse and really pretty. I would say an elegant masculine horse. Most stallions that are elegant are, can be somewhat feminine. I think he had a certain masculinity, even though he was a stallion, very refined
and elegant at the same time.
Yeah. I learned to appreciate him more as time went on, especially as broodmare sire. But as far as beauty, he was certainly an elegant, a very beautiful horse.
And then we have Galal also.
Galal was, again, another chestnut. He was more of a lighter chestnut, I think, than Alavin. A shorter coupled horse, shorter necked, pleasing head. He had an undershot jaw, which I think detracted a little bit from his head, although he didn't seem to produce it. Shorter legged. He was a more compact horse than rather typical of that Yosria family.
Yes. Who else was there by Nazir as the sons of Nazir? Then we had Ibn Halima.
Well, I can't think of anything. Oh, Fayek was also one that was there.
Yes.
He was upriver, and we had asked Dr. Syed Mari at that time, after we came back and got to know the horses better, to try to bring in all the Nazir sons, because many of them were out. Maybe there was something there that could be used again, back in the herd. That's when they brought Fayek back, who was the Nafisa line. Yeah. Very, very nice horse, too. Didn't seem to be as great a sire. I think Martin Lober eventually imported him. But there were several of the Nazir sons. Wasim was one that came in.
Wasn't Talal also one of the Nazir sons?
Talal was a Nazir son, but he was imported by Jim Klein. I saw him also. Very elegant horse. Not tall, but beautiful length of neck, pleasing head, nice eye, raced well. He was an interesting horse. Let's see what other Nazirs were there. Who else was there? We had Galal. I think Wasim was also brought back from the Delta. Syed Mari used him. He was a really powerful. Reminded me more of Mansour, and he was a Rodan
family.
Rodan family, different than any of the others.
Yes.
Powerful horse.
Yes. And then we have, of course, we discussed Murafik earlier. And we'll discuss the Ibn Halim and the other Ansata stallions later on at a different
Anybody else?
subject.
Antar? We didn't talk about
Then we have also Balance, Antar, Tuhotmus. So let's start with Antar.
Yeah. Antar was another, came from Inchas. He had been used there. He was a Hamdan son.
Yes.
Very powerful horse. Very strong bodied. I mean, he was a war horse. Well balanced, strong bones, an interesting head, very, very upright neck, carried himself well with a lot of pride, good top line, maybe a little soft in the back as he got older. But he had an interesting head, not a large eye, but he had his eyes and the sockets were different, very nice ears, but he had an interesting shape to his eyes. And the funny thing, I was talking to Jenny Ogden recently, and she said, I can almost always tell when there's Antar in the pedigree of a horse, and I can tell it by when I'm, she of course does makeup and clipping and stuff when she's photographing the horses. She says, I can touch there, and I had never said anything about this to anybody. I can tell whether there's Antar in the pedigree just by the touch of the eyes, the eye sockets and how they set. I said, I can't believe you're telling me that now, because he had something that was different. It was bonier or just a different shape.
Of the eye socket.
The eye sockets, yes, the way the eyes set in the sockets.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. But he was a really interesting horse.
Good mover.
would say good.
Good?
Yeah, I wouldn't say spectacular. I mean, I never saw him turn really loose, but on a lead and so forth, he moved well. Yeah.
And then
Started better daughters than sons.
better daughters than sons,
Much
Antar,
better,
for
yes.
sure.
He had some lovely daughters.
Yes. Al-Sariya.
El-Sariya was, he was spectacular. I never forgot, he was bay, and his coat was like a newly minted copper penny. It had a sheen to it, which you very rarely ever see. He was stunning. He was just one of the prettiest bay stallions I've ever seen in my life. Perfect balance, nice tail set, beautiful arched neck, very clean, pretty head with more of the longer foreface, but very refined. Just overall good conformation. And he was out of the old Bint el Bahrain family. Full sister was Maisa. But I'll never forget him. I thought he was one of the most beautiful stallions that the EAO had. And of course, he didn't turn out to be a great sire of sons.
Yes.
But his daughters were very elegant.
Yes. Also important, yes. Balance.
Balance, I saw, he was old. He was old. And he was slightly down in the back at the time, but, you know, an overall well-balanced horse with a decent neck and kind of a longish head. I think maybe he got the heads through the old horse Samhan. But, you know, as I say, when I saw him, he was old, and I really don't remember too much about him. I remember more his son, which was Shahryar, later on called Nasrallah. I saw him at the racetrack.
Nasrallah? Yes. The son of balance.
The son of balance.
Yes.
And
how did Nasrallah look like?
He raced well. He was when I saw him, he was pretty much in race condition. But he was a well-balanced horse. As I recall, he had a pretty good neck. Okay, had not, most of the balance progeny didn't have particularly good heads. Even Mr. Hamza had several balanced sons. They didn't have very pretty heads. But they could run, and they were, they were good race horses, and I would say more of a racing build. Fairly tall, long, medium length bodies. And I can't remember any particular defect or asset. They were just, Nasrallah himself was a nice horse.
We forgot to talk about Sidabuhum.
Oh yeah, he was old. He was quite emaciated when we saw him, but I remember specifically, I mean, of course he was pretty bony at the time, emaciated. But he had a very beautiful shoulder, very nice, well laid back shoulder, fairly deep shoulder, and pleasing neck. Looked like it was pretty well set on, with a nice throat, lovely eyes. I remember that. Lovely eyes and ears, and a nice head, fairly medium length. But body wise, as I say, I suppose when he was young, he would have been a pretty well balanced horse. Nice top line. Not so sure. I think some of the tail sets were not as nice as Nazir or the Nazir get, but he was a very important sire.
Then we have also Tuhutmus.
Tuhutmus, I remember, I hadn't seen anything by El-Sariya, and I'd asked Dr. Marsafi, why don't you try and double a Shalul and see, breed him to Moni at El Nafus and see what you get. He's produced lovely daughters, but I didn't see any sons anywhere. So he did. And here I was hoping for something absolutely spectacular to come out, and out came Thomas. He was bay, short coupled. I think, as I recall, he had rather long ears and a rather plain head, decent neck, and I don't think he just wasn't what I had hoped he would be. I had expected, or had hoped for something really spectacular. He was nice, and he turned out to produce a few very nice progeny, daughters, but you know, maybe if he'd tried it 3 times, might have gotten something spectacular.
Better,
Happens.
Yeah. The nice horse, always everybody talks about العربي, that did not leave a mark.
Oh yeah, oh my, that was, he was spectacular. He, you know, whenever I first saw him, I thought, oh, he's a stallion a king should ride. He was very tall, long legs, kind of feminine in a sense, a little bit light behind, but really nice hindquarter with a nice tail set, carried a beautiful, beautiful black tail. Long, well laid back shoulder, very upright, clean neck, beautiful head, beautiful eyes and ears and expression. He just had that, I think, that kind of expression that Morafik gave to many of his progeny. You're just high off the ground and a really dynamic. And I will never forget, as long as I live, I don't know what ever made them do it, but they decided one day, we were talking about Al Eldin and El Arabi and movement in horses. They turned El Arabi and Al Eldin loose together in a big paddock.
Both stallions.
Both stallions. Both had been breeding.
Whose idea was that?
I guess it was Marsafi's at that time. Yeah. I nearly died. I couldn't believe they were going to do that.
And what happened?
Well, if you wanted to see chalk and cheese, I mean, El Arabi so far outmoved El Eldin. They never touched each other, but as far as movement and trot and freedom, there was no comparison. Absolutely no comparison. I would never have believed it.
Interesting.
But this horse could move like white lightning.
Wow. Al Arabi.
El Arabi.
Yes, yes.
And El Eldin had raced well. He'd raced on the track. But as far as freedom of movement and shoulder and driving, there was no comparison. And the funny thing was, they just kind of ignored each other. I don't remember any squealing or yelling or anything like stallions would do. I guess they knew they weren't going to do anything.
Yeah, they must have done it before.
I guess, but it was amazing. It was an amazing.
Interesting.
I certainly would never have turned 2 of my stallions loose.
Nowadays we are way to let 2 fillies loose together.
Right.
Yeah. ابن منية النفوس.
Oh, by the way, I probably shouldn't go back and say this, but
no, it's okay.
In those days, when you drove into El Zara,
yes,
there was a little gatehouse, but no gate.
Yes.
And you just drive down the long roadway or driveway into past all the paddocks, and the old office building was there on the left.
Yes.
And it started to bother me. I said, they really should have a gate there. You really should put a gate there. Oh, they didn't put a gate there. They didn't put a gate there. El Arabi got loose, ran down the road, ran into a bus and was killed. Syed Mari had a gate there the next day.
Wow. Unfortunate. Yeah. We tend to do that sometimes.
Yeah. Who hasn't? But what a waste.
Making insurance after the accident.
Because El Arabi only sired a very few foals.
Yes.
Before he died.
Yes. I think Imad is one of them.
Imad was one, but that didn't.
That did not.
That didn't. He didn't dominate there at all.
No.
Not at all.
And maybe he was not maybe a broodmare sire. Could be.
Well, it's hard to say. I think he had a couple of daughters that were okay.
Yes.
And produced well.
Yes.
And actually, there were some Ahmad get that weren't bad. Actually, there was another young stallion that resembled El Arabi, not as great, and I think he went back to that somewhere to him. I don't know what happened. I think he was sterile though.
We talked a lot about stallions, but we'll talk about mares later on. But let's continue with the stallions. Ibn Muniyat al-Nufus.
He was a very interesting horse. He was another one that Dr. Marsafi and I talked about, and I said, why don't you bring Morafik back to Moniyat? And he did, and Ibn Moniyat was the result. Well, this one worked. He was a really elegant horse. Again, tall, much more on the style of Morafik than Moniyat. I mean, Morafik definitely dominated, although he was a finer head and a better neck than Moravik. He had a little better mitba, but tall, well-balanced horse, pretty long shoulder, but not as much so as his sire. Turned out to be a good show horse as well as a very good breeding horse, but a very elegant horse. Not super extreme in head, but a very pleasing head.
Then there is Jasir also.
Oh, yeah.
That we forgot.
Oh, he was another war horse. He was...
Like Antar?
Yeah,
in a way?
But he was a real flea-bitten gray. He was an attractive horse. He was a well-balanced horse, but he was very straight in the hindquarters. I rode him one time. He was real straight behind. It was a miserable ride. But he had a real classic look about him. A nice head, not exotic, but a pleasing head. A very nice upright neck. But he was heavy. He was a heavy horse.
You did get a chance to also see Aswan. Did you see him in Egypt?
I saw Aswan as a race horse. He was at the racetrack. A very pretty horse. I saw him. I must have seen him at the time we saw Ibn Halima as a young horse. But he didn't strike me in comparison. Obviously, I would have remembered him. But I did see him later on. They sent him to the racetrack, and I really liked him. I thought he was a very pretty at that time. Had dried out more, was more refined, and a nicely balanced horse. I think I took some pictures of him at that time. Of course, then later they brought him back and gave him to the Russians.
Do you think Aswan being into the Egypt, if he would have been kept in the Egyptian breed, would have made
big mistake to sell that horse.
Would have made a big difference?
I think he would have made a huge difference. Again, because it was a Hadban and Zahi, and it was
son of Nazir.
Son of Nazir, and bringing that Hadban line back into the herd. I think he could have. I mean, look what he did for the Russians. Of course, they were outcrosses.
Yes.
But I think seeing what he did as a sire there, and knowing what his pedigree was, I think he could have been a major asset. Certainly a major asset even in the state.